Hello everybody. In this video I'm going to be showing you how I make dovetails for my homemade Nerf blasters. Dovetails are an incredibly useful thing to learn when doing blaster design. There are several different use cases for dovetails, and I'm going to be going over all of them in this video, but off the top of my head, if you don't have space for screws in a design, you can put dovetails there. You can use dovetails as a thing to mount your priming handle to if you're doing a pump action blaster for a more secure assembly. You can use dovetails to attach larger prints. So if you have a large flat panel of some type, like this on the old Super Sledge design, you can split it in half and dovetail it together. You can also use dovetails to make something removable or detachable. So on the Cynthia, on this older version of the Cynthia, I should say, I have a dovetail here to make the stock easier to remove. And then on the Sillymax 1400, there is a large dovetail all the way down the length of the back of the blaster. And that's so you can remove that top cover and get to the air tank inside. And then, of course, you can use dovetails in addition to screws to just give something extra little bit of rigidity. So here on the slab stock, there are dovetails in between all of the core panels, as you can see there. And that isn't strictly necessary with how the screws are laid out. You could totally build this blaster without any dovetails and just have screws hold it all together. But using dovetails removes some screws from the design, lowering hardware cost and making it easier to assemble. So let's start going over the specific examples I have here, and I will at some point in this video show you how to make a dovetail. Most of this is going to be talking about the decision process to decide that you want to use a dovetail in a place versus actually making a dovetail, because making a dovetail is incredibly easy. In fact, it's so easy, I'm going to just start off with that. So let's make some parts here. Let's make a nice rectangle and another nice rectangle of some type. Yeah, there you go. There's your rectangles. Those are pretty good rectangles. So let's say that these are two separate parts. This is that, and this is that, let's say. And you want to attach these two parts together. Well, first of all, you could drill screws in from the top down, but that makes it so that it costs more hardware, and it might be misaligned and stuff like that. Or it might be wonky orientation. So if you have screws coming in from the side, like from up here, a screw there and a screw there, but it's printing on this face, then you have to print those screw holes in a vertical position, which doesn't often cause issues, but it can cause issues from time to time. So let's use a dovetail. I want to take these two parts, and I want to make a dovetail. So what I generally do is I find the center line of the top part, or of a part, find the center line, and then what I'll do is I'll make one half of the dovetail and then I'll mirror it. On some designs, like on this is one of my AEB designs, you don't really need a symmetrical dovetail. You can have a dovetail that just has one pointy bit instead of a pointy bit on both ends. And that can be easier to print in some cases, but it's also just not necessary to have both ends of a dovetail be pointy. So, whatever. I'll go over both sides pointy just for sake of explanation. So I want to make this dovetail go down here. Let's say 5 millimeters. Let's say 10 millimeters. Let's say 20 millimeters. I didn't use scale when making this, so I didn't recognize how large this is, but yeah. 20 millimeters. Let's go another 20 millimeters that way. Let's go down, I don't know, 10. Yeah, it seems fine. Let's then take this bit and offset that. I want it to be 10 millimeters thick total. And since I'm going to be mirroring this, and then this needs to be minus 10. Like so. So here you go. Here is the basics of a dovetail. So that little thing down there will grab everything here. So I will then mirror all of this along that line. And there you go. There is a basic dovetail. So if I were to extrude that, like so, let's do it as a new body. What I would do is I would then cut this into that. And there you go. There is a basic dovetail. That, however, is a very crap dovetail. Let me turn off design history real quick. What are the problems with this dovetail? First of all, there are no fillets, so this has lots of stress risers, 90-degree angles, focus stress, and they will snap off. This also is relatively thin, and it's also not, it doesn't have any tolerance to slide into this bottom piece. So let's fix all those issues. I'm going to start this as a new sketch. So let's fix this one by one. I want to add some tolerance to the bottom piece. I'm just going to offset that whole shell like that. I'm going to open up my bodies. I'm going to hide bits I don't want to cut. And I'm just going to extrude that down there. And there you go. You can see now that has a bit of a relief around the outside to more easily slide in between the two parts. It's important to note that if, depending on the orientation of your dovetails, you want to add more or less tolerancing. So take into account if this print was like this, with this bottom portion being the build plate, there would be bridging along this top line right there. So you would actually want to give that more tolerancing up that way to account for the bridging sagging down and taking up a bit more space. So if that had a 1 tolerance, I would probably give it 2 tolerance, and there you go. Something like that. So let's go over the next thing. It's not filleted. I want to fillet this. So I'm going to combine this with that part now. And I'm going to fillet this. I'm going to take the fillet tool, and I'm just going to fillet all of these corners. I forgot how big I made this. Yeah, let's do 4. There you go. That's nicely filleted now. That's a lot better. However, I also want to make this middle bit wider. That right there is a lot more durable. Now, it's important to note that in this design right here, it would be strongest printed on this face. Like, oh, can I align this? There we go. It would be printing like that, with that bottom being the build plate. And that would cause these portions to all be part of the same layer. So this whole highlighted area is one big layer, and that attaches the dovetail to the rest of the part a lot better than if it's printing like this, and this right here is a layer line. Because then it's just going to snap right along that line right there, because there's nothing really grabbing it to the rest of the blaster. So yeah, this right here is an adequate dovetail. I would dare say it's a good dovetail. I would use this in a design. However, this doesn't really take into account wonky print tolerances, or I just realized I never increased the tolerance for this part to count the new shape. Whatever. Tolerance the whole. This shape of dovetail right here, this sort of T shape, doesn't take into account different print orientations. So if I wanted to print this with this bottom face down here being the print bed, discounting the fact that layer lines would probably snap there, but whatever. Maybe it doesn't particularly matter. Maybe it's a very low stress use case, whatever. But let's just say, for sake of argument, that I wanted to print from bottom up. These flat faces here are bad. They cause issues. So let's remedy that. Actually, I'm going to just copy everything there. There we go. So let's just say that I wanted to make this like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag that down like that. And I want this to be able to print vertically. So generally 45 degrees is the most aggressive angle that you can do vertically. If I wanted to do it like this, that is 45 degrees in between this and that. That's the most aggressive. This is not 45, and that will print a lot nicer like this. So I would then take these, extrude them back, clean up the edge a little bit, refill it, and on this I would give it a much more aggressive fillet. And then let's get rid of these hard edges as well. There you go. That is a really good dovetail. That right there will work excellently in pretty much any use case. So there's also some more wonky shaped dovetails that you can do. Like here on the Silly Max, if I hide all of these bodies, you can see it's more of a one side has the pointy bit, and it's just kind of weirdly shaped. That will work excellently because it's also mirrored on the other side, so it has two pointy bits pointing into the middle, and you can see this shape of this piece is shaped like a inverse dovetail, I guess you could think of it, and that works very well. That same shape is also what I did on the slab magwell. If I grab this, as you can see, the dovetails in the slab magwell are also this sort of inverse dovetail shape. If you were to take this on your screen, it goes down, up, over, down, over. Inverse dovetail. So this also works great. If I pull up a magwell, one of these pieces, you can see the shape of that. It's just two little grabby arms. And that is plenty durable because this magwell prints with this bottom face on the print bed. So all of these are all different parts of the full layer. So it's not going to break along this face and just break across there. No, it would have to break all of this in order for this dovetail to come off. So it's plenty durable. So now that I've shown you how to make a dovetail, and I haven't shown you how to make all the dovetails, however, it's very easy to figure out. You just make two triangles, put them end to end, add a bit of space in between them, fillet the edges. You got a dovetail. And then cut that with a path through the piece that you want to dovetail to, and then give that a bit of tolerance on the edges. And then boom, you got a dovetail. So now let's talk about the decision making for making a dovetail in your blaster. On each one of these examples, I'm going to close this real quick. On each one of these examples, the dovetail is used in a different way. So let's go over that. First off, I'm going to show you how I used a dovetail in the back of the Cynthia stock. So if I hide all of this right here, there we go, and all of that as well. Beautiful. And let's change the color of these so it's easier for you to see. There you go. There you go. So as you can see here, this little shape right here is a dovetail. it's not necessarily a dovetail in the strictest sense of the word, but it's a dovetail in practice. This was done because this part has active upwards force put on it, but not a lot of it. So this part is actively trying to go up like this whenever the blaster is primed and fired, but I don't want it to. And there's no space down here to fit a screw. As you can see, this contour down here is very tight up against the space that's available inside the blaster. So there's no space for a screw in there. Therefore, dovetails. So this part, this orange part, prints on that face. This green part prints on this face. And dovetails just grab onto the part and don't let it go up. So I wasn't able to fit screws in this area, so I used a dovetail. Another place on the same blaster that used a dovetail, because I couldn't fit screws in the place, is up here. There is a dovetail up here, as you can see, and that attaches to this piece. As you can see, grabbed by the dovetail. And that's because this green piece up here is also trying to be pushed up. And it also makes it easier to assemble by just sliding it together like jigsaw pieces instead of having to put screws together. So dovetails are a lot easier to assemble in my opinion, and they also help you reduce screw count, which is very nice. And before we leave Cynthia completely, I'll also go over to this old version of Cynthia where I tried using a dovetail to make this stock easily detachable. The problem with this dovetail is that it was easy to misalign, and then you could feel it along the bottom. So it wasn't comfortable to hold. But the dovetail worked just as intended. It was perfectly strong enough to hold the stock aligned. This piece didn't come out, but it just wasn't as precise a method of assembly as I really wanted for the stock. So I switched to a bolt in the future versions of the Cynthia, but there's a dovetail in this version. So as you can see in this grip piece prints along that bottom face, and I have done a big angle to the edge of the dovetail to make it print better in that orientation. And that works just fine. And then this piece also prints just like that on that face, and that just has a slope to match. And that goes together beautifully. That is a very good use of a dovetail to both remove hardware and make something removable easily. All right, so now that we're done with Cynthia, I guess we'll move right on over to the Sillymax 1400. On this blaster, this whole red top cover piece, let me just hide some stuff. There we go. This whole red top cover piece is easily removable from the rest of the blaster to access the air tank inside of it. So this whole red piece slides off the back just like that. And then I said this whole red piece, including that part that got left behind for some reason. This whole red piece just slides off the back of the blaster. As you can see, there are two massive dovetails right there, there, and there, with two matching massive dovetails there and there. And this lets you keep the top cover in place securely when you don't want it removed, but it's also very easy to remove when you do want it to come off. These two massive dovetails make it very hard for it to rip off the top of the blaster, like this, because there's a lot of meat in these dovetails. However, it's very easy to slide it off the back of the blaster when you want to. So that's an example of a dovetail being used in a place where you need to easily access something all the time. I would also use a dovetail in this sort of setup when I was doing something like a battery door on a flywheel or an AEB. Using dovetails for that and maybe a thumb screw to lock it in place works very well. In that sort of scenario, I would use just dovetails if it wasn't a very heavy use blaster. But if it's something where you're planning to run around and possibly like drop it, or it gets bumped around or something like that, if you want it to be durable, I would use a thumb screw to keep it in place, and then use dovetails as an accessory to that thumb screw. The dovetails would help align it and also add extra stay in place power to that thumb screw. So the thumb screw's real job would just be not letting it move back and forth, and the dovetail's job is to make sure that it can't pull out, if that makes any sense. So if I show you on this, what I'm saying is I would use a thumb screw to keep it going like this. The dovetail's job is to make it keep from going like this. So yeah, that's the Sillymax 1400, and that's the dovetail on that. On the Super Sledge, this large side panel takes a lot of force. Apologies, my phone just made a ding sound. On the Super Sledge, which is an old design of mine that I abandoned due to other issues, but this part worked great. This is a very large side panel and it takes a lot of force. Basically, the entire force of the blaster, all of the spring force, all of the firing impact, everything is put up on this side panel. So normally I print the side panel as one giant piece. However, that doesn't fit on a lot of printers. So what I did was I used dovetails to stick these two parts together. This setup worked fantastically. It didn't really make the parts any weaker because there is basically no tolerance in between these parts. These are extremely tight dovetails, so you would hit these together with a hammer, and that makes sure that they're extremely durable as well. If there's no tolerance in the dovetail, it's going to be nice and strong. These are both in the correct print orientation as well. They're both flat prints, so they're printed on that flat face like that, which means that all of these dovetails are part of the rest of this piece in terms of layers. So they're nice and durable, they won't break off, and they're all working together. There's a lot of dovetails in this small area. It's a beautiful piece, and it stays together excellently. So that's an example of dovetails being used to split a piece that is otherwise too large to fit on a printer. So yeah, that's that. We already went over two parts of the slab, but I guess I'll go over them again. In the back stock area of the slab, it is done with sandwiched together layers. So there's a core, and then a layer on the one side and layer on the other side. The core of the slab stock is held together with dovetails. That both aligns the stock and makes sure that it's not wonky in any of the ways, but it also makes it much stronger than if I had just used screws. The slab stock itself, if it was just screwed together with the three layers, so you got your core, left side, right side, if it was just screws and you knock this against like a concrete floor or something like that, all the screws might break and this piece can just shear off like that, which isn't great. And more so if there's no dovetails here, because it would be this piece, and this piece all being together as one part, but with no dovetails. So it's all sort of just flopping on these two screws down here, and then these two screws up here. So if you knock this, it would just snap off like that, which isn't good. So the dovetails in the slab stock keep it much more sturdy than if they weren't there. So as you can see, there's one dovetail in the front, two dovetails in the back, and that all holds it together nice and strong. So that's an example of both using dovetails to remove hardware. I don't need as many screws now that I have dovetails there, and also using them in conjunction with screws to make something a lot stronger than if there were no dovetails. And then over here on the turnaround and the magwell, I went over this already, but the dovetail here is a nice long dovetail. It's a very skinny dovetail, but it's very long. And that keeps these two parts together very well. There are screws down here that keep the dovetail aligned and keep it from sliding apart on its own. But most of the force keeping the magwell attached to the turnaround here is from those dovetails. And I did this because there's no space here for screws otherwise. I originally had screws going in these sort of chunkier bits up front, straight down like that, but those snap off. There's no real space here for anything other than dovetails. And dovetails work great here. One thing that I do want to touch on in the slab dovetails while we're still here is that on these dovetails, since they're so long, they can get a bit wobbly, which is bad. You do want to have enough tolerance, that is the hole being more open than the dovetail itself trying to go in the hole. You do want to have some openness there so it's easy to put together. However, you don't want it to be so loose. Sorry, my phone went ding again. You don't want it to be so loose that it is impossible to stay aligned, and like stuff will get misaligned, darts will jam if it's not aligned correctly. If it's not aligned as well, if it's floppy, repeated use might break it because it's putting uneven load on the whole dovetail. So on this, I have these two ridges right here, and another one on the other side. And those tighten the dovetail. As you can see here, they stick into it as it reaches the top of the dovetail, this side down here being the top. It sticks into the dovetail and keeps it nice and tight as it's inserted. And that is a wonderful thing to do if you need a dovetail that is loose enough to assemble, but you don't want it to be wobbly. Just add little ridges inside the dovetail channel to tighten it. Let's move on. I'm also going to close this Cynthia file. This is the last example that I have for this video. This is one of my AEB designs I'm working on. And this has two dovetails that I really want to show you. The first dovetail, I think I already showed previously in this video, is back here on the grip. This grip here is made out of grip panels, like this. And these are flat prints. This would print along that face right there. And these have giant half dovetails along the top edge. And that goes into a giant half dovetail on the body piece that it's attaching to. Now, by itself, one half of this wouldn't be very strong. However, if I were to mirror this, which it will be once it's assembled, and hopefully not crash Fusion 360. Oh, interesting. Let's try that again. If I were to mirror this, this whole area is extremely sturdy because the way that this is assembled is these two grip panels are sandwiched into a grip assembly. So all this bottom area is all one solid chunk, and this top area is one big solid chunk. So this ends up being just a massive dovetail in practice, where it's going all the way down here, up and across, all the way across, and then down there. It's a massive dovetail, and that makes this grip area both easy to assemble, because you would just slide this all on from the back, whoop, just like that. You got your grip assembled, and it also makes sure that I can't like rip it out the bottom, because if I do, I have to fight against these massive dovetails if I wanted to rip it out the bottom like that. And of course, this grip is also held in place by screws. That's what these holes right here are for. Those screws are to keep the dovetail aligned and make sure that there's no like weird seams on the blaster. But most of the force holding it together is these dovetails. So these are great dovetails. This is a case where I knew that in order to have it be strong enough, if I wasn't using dovetails, I would have to use a bunch of screws. And that's both hard to assemble for someone. No one really likes putting in a ton of screws. So I try to avoid using a ton of screws as much as I can. However, I also don't like using big hardware, because hardware costs money. So if I could replace a bolt with a screw, I'm going to do that, because bolts are like, let's say a bolt is 5 cents, a screw is 1 cent. Add that up over an entire blaster, you maybe cut $5 off the hardware kit cost. That's pretty good. Dovetails are free. So 1 cent is bigger than 0 cents, and added up over an entire blaster, that's maybe an extra $1 off the hardware kit cost. That's how you get hardware kit costs lower as a whole across an entire blaster, is you just shave off every little bit that you don't need, and then you get a nice cheap hardware kit. That's why the slab hardware kits are nice and cheap, because I spent 3 months shaving one screw off there and removing a bolt over there and making the threaded rod a little bit shorter so you can get more out of the stock that the shop needs to cut. I managed to bring down the hardware kit cost from like $55 to $45, and that's a big difference for some people. So it's worthwhile doing that sort of design. And the last dovetail that I want to go over isn't actually one of mine. This is a dovetail by Taffy, from Caramel Designs. That's what this magwell is based off of. This is a magwell from the Skewer, which is one of his designs. The dovetail here is actually what holds together the magwell. So if I go over here, I'm just going to mirror this piece so you can see it better. Like that. One moment. There we go. So these are two pieces. On the skewer, which is the original part of this design, these two parts would be connected, and it would print on this face down here. So this top edge with the dovetail would be a bridge. But on this design, there are two flat panels. So this is printed on that side, and this is printed on that side. It's a flat panel like that. But nonetheless, dovetail works the same. On this, he managed to reduce the amount of screws on the magwell to just 2. So you have one screw here in the back and another screw here in the back, and that keeps it on the blaster. And then this dovetail in the front makes it so you don't need screws in the front. You can make the front a lot shorter, and it's basically the only way that you could add this extra bit of color to the bottom of the blaster without adding a bunch more hardware or making it harder to assemble. This is just a mastermind of a dovetail right here by Taffy. It's a great design. So that's another thing that you should take into account, is you don't necessarily need to have all of your dovetails symmetrical. He has one dovetail here, not 2 dovetails. He doesn't have another dovetail in the back. So you don't really need to go gung-ho full all the way into dovetails for an entire design. You just need to start thinking in a way where, okay, let's say that I have 4 screws here. I don't really need 4 screws here. I can have 2 screws in the dovetail. And that's getting back again into that whole shaving off 1 screw in every place gets you a lot less screws overall in the blaster, which makes it both easier to assemble and easier to afford, less expensive. So yeah, that is pretty much all that I have to say about dovetails. I suppose one last thing that I forgot to cover was using dovetails as a priming handle bar thing. Let me grab one of those real quick. Where do I have that? I have that on this. This is a work in progress design. This layout doesn't actually work. This is a really crappy brainstorm. So ignore all the stuff that you see here. This is bad. This is very bad. But this is what I'm talking about down here. Using a dovetail as the mount for your priming handles. So stuff like the Caliburn from Captain Slug has the priming handle sitting on threaded rods or aluminum bars or U-channels. But on this design and a few other designs that I've made and that work, I have my priming handles just sitting on a dovetail. Now the issue with this is you need to really, really take into account the one second. You really need to take into account the print orientations here. So let's think about this. 3D printed parts, and I'm going to pick up a few and make sounds with them real quick. 3D printed parts. If you have two 3D printed parts and they are both printed vertically and they rub against each other, you get a very nasty sound. No one wants that when they're priming their blaster. However, if you have two 3D printed parts and one of them is printed vertically and one of them is printed flat, this flat side is both a lot smoother and the layer lines aren't aligned. So, again, when the layer lines are the same in between the two parts, the print orientation is the same in between the two parts, you get this nasty sound. But if the two layer lines are opposite of each other, so let's say you have one vertical print and one print that is 90 degrees from that vertical print, so you have the print bed side or the top side of a print up against the layer line side of a print, it's a lot quieter and a lot less friction in between the two parts. Not sure if my microphone's even picking this up, but it's a lot smoother. So that's what I did on this. This black part here prints on this face, prints vertically like that, which means that the layer lines on this are going this way, back and forth. The layer lines on this bottom piece, this is the print face. So the layer lines on this are going up and down on your screen. They're going like this. So the layer lines on this black piece are going like this. Layer lines on this orange piece are going like this. When they are rubbing up against each other, they're extremely smooth. Because when you have your layer lines the same in between the two parts, it adds a lot of friction. But when you have them opposite on the two parts, where you have one 90 degrees from the other, it's extremely smooth. It's very smooth. So this sort of setup actually has less friction than like a Caliburn. Or that's a bit of an overstatement, since there's so many different Caliburns. This sort of setup is less friction than, let's say, a threaded rod Caliburn, because this is both less friction from the pieces rubbing together, but it's also better aligned than on a Caliburn, because if you are priming a blaster, a Springer, a pump action Springer, your priming grip is putting force on the blaster like this, and it's trying to pull it up against whatever you're priming on. So on this, it would be pulling up against this face. This orange bit is trying to go up as it's coming back. But because I have such low tolerances here, there's no real space for it to do that and cause friction. However, on a Caliburn, the threaded rod holes are a lot wider than the holes in the priming handle, and it can not bend, but it can misalign, which causes a lot more friction. You will also notice this on something like a SBL from Gavin Fuzzy. If you compare that against a Talon Claw, the SBL has bushings in between the priming handle and the threaded rods to make that tolerance a lot tighter, which makes it so that it can't tweak and it can't misalign and cause friction. So the SBL ends up a lot smoother than the Caliburn. That's the same sort of situation here, where this space right here is so tight, relatively speaking, that it can't misalign itself. However, it's still loose enough and low friction enough to prime smoothly back and forth. And that's all thanks to dovetails. Because if I didn't have dovetails here, I would just be able to like pry this off the bottom and have it bend my priming bars and all that stuff, which would be great, or which would be awful. But due to dovetails, it's able to stay in place, and it's great. And I suppose that I should also mention that separate from all of that, this dovetail here is actually just a piece of Picatinny rail, but without the Picatinny notches on it, and slightly scaled up. So yeah, take that into account. Picatinny rail is a dovetail of sorts. So yeah, if you want to dovetail something together and you, for some reason, don't want to design dovetails, you can just take a Picatinny rail file and remove all the notches from it. Just remove all these notches and then you get a reasonable dovetail. And that can also be used for attaching things. So if you have, let's say, a modular blaster where you have a bottom half and a top half, but you want to be able to remove the bottom half and replace it with a pump grip, well, you can just use the bottom half attached to the top half with Picatinny. And you don't necessarily need to use the holes in the Picatinny. You can just have it dovetail together. And there you go. You got a dovetail. It's not necessarily the greatest dovetail, but it's a dovetail nonetheless, and you can use that in your modular blaster. So yeah, that is pretty much all that I have to say about dovetails. Thank you for watching this. This is a bit rambly of a video, but I hope that I got the point across about dovetails. If you have any questions about dovetails or where to use dovetails in your projects or anything like that, feel free to leave a comment in the video and I will reply as soon as possible. I will also probably make a page on my website about dovetails, showing pictures of examples of dovetails and any future work that I use with dovetails. If I do end up making that webpage, I will put it in the description below. That webpage will not be here at the time I upload this video, but it will come later at some point. So yeah, thank you for watching. Hope that you got something useful out of this rambly video on dovetails. And yeah, have a nice day.